Okay, so we are just in terms of the process before looking at the epistle about the resurrection of the dead, in which many people claim that the Rambam was doing it in order to clarify his position, that he was being basically accused of not believing in bodily resurrection, and so he writes this epistle. But before that, I thought the idea would be to look at the different places where he talks about resurrection and sort of ask ourselves, what do we think he means by it? Is he trying to hide something? There are lots of theories. There's a theory that the whole letter about resurrection is actually forged, and the Rambam's belief in physical resurrection is perhaps not literal. That he did write it, but he was writing it in a way that he veiled his true belief. Or no, maybe he really does believe in physical resurrection. But I think it bothers him, you'll see, scientifically. So we saw in the previous chapter, first he lays out the 5 different groups of people that have different kinds of beliefs about reward and punishment. Maybe it's in this world, maybe it's very physical in the next world, and he basically throws all of them out. And then he says most people kind of mix them all together. And then he says he quotes from the Gemara that the next world is the righteous with crowns on their heads, which he says is a metaphor, benefiting from the pleasure of the divine, and that's where he sort of settles. These are the 5 groups. And he says in the last chapter that we did, he says, just like a blind person cannot understand color, or he says a eunuch cannot understand sexual intercourse, cannot understand all these pleasures. So too, he says the body, it's impossible for us to say that we understand the pleasures of the world to come, because he says those are not physical pleasures. You're not going to have a body. But he says that doesn't mean it's less, right? If such is our state in the material world, how much more will it be in the spiritual world, where our souls will attain a knowledge of the Creator? He says if there's something fulfilling about spirituality in this world, how much more so in the next world? And then you can see here he's moving. He veers toward the idea not of certainly a physical reward and punishment, but a spiritual reward and punishment in the next world. And then he says the Torah's rewards. He says the Torah does talk about physical reward and punishment, right? You'll have the rain in its time, etc. He says if you give this matter full reflection, you'll find it to be equivalent to being told, if you carry out some of these laws with love and diligence, I will help you to perform all of them. In other words, he's saying that's not the real reward. That's when the Torah says I'm going to give you the rain in its time. It's that if you keep the Torah, I'm going to facilitate you keeping more of it. If you abandon any of them out of disdain, I'll bring hindrances to your path. This is what is meant by these Christian sages. The reward for observing a precept is a precept itself, right? In Pirkei Avot, reward for transgression is a transgression itself. In other words, that it leads you down a path of doing more and more in this world. And then he says, and then he kind of deals with all these. But we're a little bit unclear. What's the difference between the Garden of Eden, hell, Gehinnom, the resurrection of the dead, the days of the Messiah, right? It's all very confusing to us. So he says, as for the Garden of Eden, this is a fertile spot. This is his opinion. It's a fertile spot on the earth's sphere, rich in streams and fruits. God will certainly disclose it to people one day, and show them the path leading to it. I guess it's Miami. Man will reap enjoyment within it, and there may possibly be found therein plants of a very extraordinary sort, great in usefulness and pleasure-giving properties. All of this is not impossible nor far-fetched. On the contrary, it's quite likely. But even so, if it was, and it would be even so if it was not mentioned in the Torah, how much more so that it is mentioned in the Torah. So that's interesting. He believes that the Garden of Eden and the story of the Garden of Eden in Bereshit is an actual spot on earth. It doesn't sound like it's such a special spot. It doesn't sound like it actually matters in reward and punishment, according to the Rambam, even though certainly you find statements among the rabbis, of souls in the Garden of Eden. which sounds like a spiritual thing. The Rambam here is saying, no, the Garden of Eden is just a physical place on earth. But the Gehinnom, now we don't obviously see any of these. I mean, the Garden of Eden is mentioned in the 5 books of Moses, but it's a place, it seems like, just like the Rambam saying here. Now, things like Gehinnom, the resurrection of the dead, days of the Messiah, we see these in the prophets, absolutely, but we don't see them in the 5 books of Moses. Gehinnom is an expression for the suffering that will befall the wicked. The nature of the suffering is not clarified in the Talmud. One authority states the sun will draw near. Somebody's asking whether Rambam believed the earth was a sphere or not. I think he did believe it was a sphere because, but I'm not sure he saw it in the same way we see it. The Aristotelian belief about the movement of the stars was that they were, it was Ptolemaic, they were all on sphere, everything was a sphere. The stars were spheres, the earth was a sphere. The stars that surrounded the earth were on a sphere that moved. You'll see that the Rambam also believed that there's a kind of intelligence in the spheres, that they had intelligence, something like that. So he says here, Gehinnom, one authority states the sun will draw near to the wicked and burn them. He derives his proof from the verse, behold, the day will come, this is verse in Malachi. Actually, the end of the verse is Hayom ba boer katanur, and it says so the sun will burn the wicked, and it will heal the righteous. He derives a proof from the verse. Another asserts that a strange heat will arise in the bodies and consume the righteous proof. The breath will be as fired. Now that sounds very physical. It doesn't sound spiritual at all. The resurrection of the dead, but he's just saying how people see this. He's saying one authority says this. I'm not sure who he's referring to. Maybe the Rambam. Resurrection of the dead is one of the cardinal doctrines of the Torah of Moses. One who does not, right? So here he says it is a cardinal doctrine. Who does not believe in this has no religion and no bond with the Jewish faith. This reward will be for the righteous, as is shown by the statement of Rishis Rabbah. The great benefits of rain are for both the righteous and the wicked, but the resurrection of the dead is only for the righteous. As the sages taught, the wicked are called dead even in their lives. The righteous are called living after their death. Know that man must die. Now, see, here's the thing, right? He says you have to believe in the resurrection of the dead. It's for the righteous. And then he says, as the sages taught, the wicked are called dead even in their lives. The righteous are called living even after their death, which is clearly a metaphor, right? That when the sages say that the righteous are called living even after the death, they're talking about what the righteous produce. And then he says, and know that man must die and become dissolved in his component parts. So does the Rambam, so from here, if you read this, you asked yourself, does the Rambam believe in the resurrection of the dead? What would you say? Right, to me, it seems very unclear. On the one hand, he says, yes, you have to believe in the resurrection of the dead. On the other hand, he says, the verse that he quotes, he could have quoted a more apocalyptic verse from the Navi. It's more apocalyptic about the resurrection of the dead, but he doesn't. He quotes from Chazal, from the rabbis, sort of metaphoric idea that the righteous, even in their death, are considered living, and the wicked, even in their life, are considered dead. And then he says the body dissolves. So it's very hard to know what he believes here. The Rambam does say in his introduction, as I mentioned, is that the Torah or the Mar Nevuchim, that people who contradict them, writers who create contradictions in their writing, often do it because they're trying to hide something and they're trying to reveal something. So he says, the days of the Messiah will be a time when sovereignty will return to the Jewish people. They will return to the Holy Land. King will then reign, will have Zion as the capital of his realm. His name will be great and fill the earth to its utmost bounds. He'll be greater name than that of King Solomon and mightier. Nations will make peace with him, and the countries will obey him by reason of his great righteousness and the wonders which come to light by his means. All who rise up against him, God will destroy and deliver into his hands. All verses of Scripture testify to this success through him. There will be no, now this is, he says this in the Mishnah Torah also, there will be no changes in reality from how things are now, except that sovereignty will return to Israel. This is based on a mission, that there's no difference between this world and the world to come, and the world at the time of the Messiah, except for the Jewish people having sovereignty in the land of Israel, which, by the way, is right now. This is the meaning of the rabbi's statement. There is no difference between the world and the days of the Messiah, except the subjugation of foreign powers. At that time, however, the gaining of, and then he says, even though he said it's not going to be miraculous at all, he says, in his days, some will be wealthy and some poor, some strong, some weak. At that time, however, the gaining of livelihood will be so easy, people will do the lightest possible labor and reap great benefit. Now, what does he, that's interesting that the Rambam says, on the one hand, there's no difference between now and the world and the time of the Messiah. That's not miraculous, but you won't have to work as hard. You're not going to have to, I guess, work as hard as people used to. It happens also to be fairly true. And now with the artificial intelligence they invented 2 weeks ago, looks like no one's going to be working anyway. The land of Israel will one day produce, this he gets from Gemara, it'll produce cakes ready baked in garments of fine silk. But what, of course, does the Rambam do with that? When one finds a thing, he says it's a metaphor. When one finds a thing easily without labor, people are in the habit of saying it's like finding ready baked bread and a meal ready cooked, right? You go into a store, you can buy bread made by a machine. So that he understands this metaphor. It's so funny. Look at this. And this is mamish. This is wild. You have a proof in this verse. The strangers will shepherd your flocks. Foreigners will work your fields and vineyards. This indicates there'll be planting and harvest in the land of Israel. And it was this time, particular rabbi made the aforementioned assertion, blamed his pupil for not understanding the true meaning of his remarks. In other words, it seems like the Rambam is saying here that this idea of the sort of quasi-miraculous idea that you're not going to have to work the field, your cakes are going to be ready baked, means you're going to have foreign workers. That's what he's saying, which I have to tell you, my daughter's kibbutz, she lives on Beirut Yitzhak, which is one of three left. It's one of three, it's a religious kibbutz, but it's one of only 3 kibbutzim that remain that are really socialized. Now, if you make money, so somebody asked my daughter yesterday, they said to her, well, does everybody work on the kibbutz? So they're plowing and planting and picking mangoes. And she said, no, the Thailand workers do that. She said, the adoptive family on my kibbutz, he works in an office for a cruise company, but he has to give his money to the kibbutz. If you make, but the kibbutzniks, even on a very socialized kibbutz, they're not working the fields. Who's working it? Foreign workers, like it says in Isaiah. It's shocking, actually. The great benefits that will accrue to us during that epoch will consist in our enjoying rest from the subjugation of the wicked empires, a situation which prevents us from full performance of the Torah's precepts. But you're going to be able to keep the Torah because you're not going to be under attack by foreigners. Obviously, that's becoming more so. Wisdom will increase, as it says, the earth will be filled with knowledge of God. Discord and wars will cease. Nations will not lift up sword against nation, right? That he believes will happen, and that's not supernatural. God's perfection will appertain to those who live in those days. They'll be elevated through the life of what's come. So you will have a greater sense of the divine. But the Messiah will die, and his son and his son's son will reign in the land. His kingdom will endure a very long time. Lives of men will be long also. This is unbelievable, because longevity is a consequence of the removal of sorrows and cares, right? Which it turns out to be true, actually. More so than what you eat and exercise. Your mood. People who are happy tend to live a long time. We do not eagerly anticipate the Messianic year on account of plentiful crops and the riches they will bring, but rather the prophets and the pious wished that to have the time of the Messiah, because it implies the gathering of the righteous, the leaders, justice, and under these conditions, one obtains a firm hold upon the world to come. Final goal is attaining the world to come, and it is to that effort must be directed. And he's saying the time of the Messiah is good because it enables us to focus on more important things, on holy things, and that brings us to the world to come. Therefore, this sage, gifted with truth, looked at the final goal and he said, all of Israel have a portion in the world to come. But the world to come for the Rambam is not a physical thing, it's a spiritual thing. The world to come constitutes the desired goal. It's not fitting for one to serve God from love to serve him in order to attain the world to come. You shouldn't do it for the sake of the world to come. Rather, one should serve God in the way that I will prescribe. It's as follows: when one firmly believes the Torah contains wisdom, which reached the prophets from God, and through it he taught them various traits, then fitting a person of well-balanced temperament to perform meritorious deeds and shun transgressions. When one acts in this fashion, his humanity has reached the point of perfection, and he's separate from the beasts. Now, as for the Rambam, reward and punishment is a natural process. When one arrives at this degree of perfection, it's the nature of perfect humans. There's no obstacle hindering their soul from living after death within the existence of its intellectual element. For the Rambam, the world to come is connected to the intellect. In other words, you perfect yourself in this. We want the time of the Messiah because that's going to make it easier to perfect ourselves and to focus on wisdom and on service of God. And that brings us, that's what enables us as a natural process to experience God in the world to come in a spiritual way. He says, this is the state of the world to come. Herein lies the significance of the psalmist's remark. Do not be like mule with no understanding. And then he says, let no one blame me for the freedom which I have used certain expressions and assertions in this treatise of mine. May provoke the criticism of the learned. I've spoken freely in this lesson. Right? He says some of this is metaphor. So it's very interesting. Where's the resurrection of the dead? I mean, what he says, oh, we all believe in the resurrection of the dead. And then he says the body dissolves. And he says the time of the Messiah is a way to facilitate having an easier time to be in the world to come. What's the world to come? That is a spiritual state of grasping the divine. So you can see why people are critical of the Rambam in terms of doubting whether he really believes in a physical resurrection of the dead. And then he goes through his 13 principles, right? If you believe in prophecy, if you believe Moses was the greatest prophet, the Torah was revealed from heaven, that Torah can never disappear, days of the Messiah. When he gets to the last principle, which is the resurrection of the dead, what does he say? We've already explained this. That's it. That's all he says. So it's like the principle of the 13 principles of Maimonides that he gives the absolute shortest shrift to, and the one that is, hard to really say, the one that he seems to dance around is absolutely the physical resurrection. You can see, I think, here people's conclusions that they're making. So that's now we'll also see. We'll look at the Mishnah Torah, his book of Jewish law, and the Maimonides, and we'll see. See in the Mishnah Torah, he doesn't mention it at all. And in Maimonides, he mentions it in also a veiled way. And then we'll have to look at the epistle about the resurrection of the dead and sort of ask ourselves, is that the Rambam? Is he being apologetic? Or what's the story? Okay. So tomorrow, it's Tuesday. Tomorrow we'll meet, but then that's the last day for 2 weeks. Send an email also. Mark knows.
Okay,
Have a good
thank
Hanukkah, everybody.
you. Hanukkah to you.